Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Nucleus Investment Insights. Today's episode is called The Wait is Over, Capitalising on the Booming Weight Loss Drug Industry. Are these new weight loss drugs the magic pill that the pharmaceutical industry and obese people have been praying for? Today we're going to take an investment look into these drugs and the impact they're having on society. We're going to explore their efficacy, the cost, the side effects, which companies are the leaders, and how you can profit from this growing trend. Just a reminder, the information in this podcast is general advice only and is not intended to be specific to your personal financial situation. If you do want to discuss your personal financial situation and how to improve that, you can book a call with me or one of the advice team at nucleuswealth.com/contact. Today, as always, we have Nucleus Wealth Chief Investment Officer and co-founder Damien Klassen. Damo, welcome.
Hi, Sam.
G'day. Today we also have Radek Zeleny, Nucleus Wealth's Senior Investment Analyst, joining us. Radek, it's great to have you back on the show. It's been a while.
Hi.
Excellent. My name's Sam Kerr, and I'm the Head of Advice at Nucleus Wealth. Just a reminder, the themes discussed in this podcast are a reflection of our thinking, which we implement across all our active portfolios. And you can find out more about our offering in the description notes below. The show is recorded live every Thursday at 12:30 Australian Eastern Standard Time. So jump onto the Nucleus Wealth YouTube channel and you can ask any questions that come to mind during the show. We are also available on all other major podcast platforms, so feel free to listen in there if you prefer. And just a reminder, until the end of the year, we are offering a free, no obligation review of your super. We'll give your super a health checkup. We'll give you clarity on how you're invested, the fees you're paying, the tax saving strategies on offer, and also the rules to the game. So you can book in via nucleuswealth.com/contact as well. So Damo, over to you to get the ball rolling.
Yeah, so I've spoken a little bit in passing on the podcast, and certainly most of a lot of clients we've been speaking with, we've been talking around this whole weight loss industry. So I think for most people, they probably would have seen something at the moment that there's a number of drugs out there which are targeting obesity and are having a reasonable amount of success. And the two major companies we've owned in our portfolios for some time because it was a theme we quite liked, and we could sort of see the potential for upside in those. Now, those stocks have run pretty hard. We still have them in our portfolios, despite being, I guess, expensive on certainly current earnings. And what I really want to talk about here was where the future earnings can go for these companies. But I guess as a bigger picture issue, whether this is actually going to make a much bigger investment theme for the whole healthcare sector and a number of other related industries over the next sort of 5 or 10 years, and what the successes might be. So I guess the goal of these is to get some sort of relatively easy to take drug with little to no side effects that people can take that would keep their weight down, and for the most part, these drugs basically keep people's weight down by making them feel less hungry and not having that urge to eat. And so, does that make a sort of step change for a lot of healthcare companies, for a lot of things like gyms and weight watchers and all these other things that might go into it? There is a potential for something major to be going on. And so what we really wanted to do was sort of dig into where the technology is at, what might happen, what's going to be most affected, and all those types of factors. So with that, we brought Radek, who's had a long history of looking at biotech stocks and healthcare stocks, as
I
our expert
struggle
in this
with
area.
weight loss like everybody else.
Yeah, that's right. and not keen to go to gyms. So we thought we might start with that, and I guess jump across to you, Radek, and talk about sort of obesity as a social burden.
Okay, as a bit of background, I guess, I've got this slide here on the magnitude of the problem, and this is obesity. So this was, is that up?
Yeah, there's a delay in that. I think so.
So back even in 2012, you can see here that obesity was the number 3 of the social burdens generated by human beings. In fact, that's now, I'd say, probably getting even larger. And you can see the cost of that is almost 3% of global GDP. It's only second to smoking and wars and terrorism. If we look at the next slide, and it's expected to increase. It's by 2030, it's expected to cost $4 trillion per year, which is about how much the COVID pandemic cost the world in 2020. But that's going to be an annual cost. If we look at obesity over time, if we go to the next slide, you can see it's a growing issue, and it's also a growing issue largely for the first world countries. You can see there that in this measure, the United States is one of the world leaders, and us as Australians are not far behind with the UK.
Yeah, and so for anyone just sort of listening into the podcast, this is sort of from 1975 to sort of the late 2020s. Oh, sorry, late 2010s. It's got the US sort of going from 1975 was closer to 10%, and then Australia and UK pretty similar bits to over 35% now. So more than a third of the US was rated obese, and that's probably going to be closer to 40% now.
And it's over 40 now, and it's projected to be over 50 by 2030. Whereas compare that to, say, Nigeria, where it has like 5%, India under 5%, low income, under 5%. High income as an average is around 25%. And it's also growing in all countries. The trend is upward in every country, even in the third world. So it is a serious issue, and basically reflects, I guess, the wealth of the world. Where
and I think this was obviously our original investment thesis, wasn't it, Radek? Was that we had a number of companies targeting obesity, and we obviously didn't know exactly how much success they'd had, although that had some reasonable success in the trials. But the idea was, well, just the fact that you've got a company targeting obesity and working on the drugs and buying small biotechs with interesting technology was an interesting enough investment theme for us to sort of want to have these stocks in our portfolios and keep them in our portfolios with an idea that there is it seems to be an inexorable trend.
Yes. And it also looks like with these new class of drugs that perhaps there might be a solution with which a lot of other treatments like cancer and there's no Alzheimer's. They're finding it very difficult to find treatments, but with this new class of drugs, it looks like there could be some sort of solution in the near term. So moving on to the next slide. At the moment with weight loss, there are rather extreme options. So on the left-hand side, the one that I guess that we should all be doing is diet and lifestyle, but that ultimately leads to about a 5% decrease in weight loss over the longer term. If you go to the other extreme is obviously surgery, where you use gastric bypasses, sleeve gastronomies. So you can get good results with those to around 25 to 30%, but they involve surgery and it's very, very invasive. But
so effectively that's just sort of tying up the stomach and making the stomach smaller. Is it?
Basically, that's it. And its permanence is also a question. I know people who've had it and then still reverted back. So it's not all these treatments. It's very difficult to get a sustained benefit. And when we go into this drug, you also see that even with these drugs, even though you're getting quite a good benefit, which is you see in the mid-range of this slide between 10 and 25%, that is while you're on the drugs. And usually the rule of thumb is that once you stop any of these sort of treatments, you lose about half the benefit. So
but they're all 15% weight loss, which is pretty significant given.
Yeah, well, the
Yeah.
thing is, if you have a drug benefit of around 25%, and even if you stop it and you retain 10%, that is a good result.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Well, and obviously with these ones, if it's, I'm assuming that it comes back on in over a period of time, and then you can go back on the drug again and bring back down.
right. At the moment, the safety data on these drugs seems to be quite good. I'll go into that in a little bit later.
Mm.
So just to move on how these drugs work, they're called GLP agonists, and they control this. It's a natural drug, and essentially it has a multi-factor effect. It increases burn in fats. It increases the insulin secretion, which absorbs the glucose, reduces absorption in skeletal muscle, and reduces glucose production in the liver. So they're quite revolutionary drugs, and the big benefit of them are, if we go, I guess, across to the pros and cons, is that they're natural chemicals and they don't last long within the body. So unlike a lot of other drugs, which maybe are uh, artificially created and affect certain things, this is a natural process. So it slows down existing pathways and doesn't block key brain receptors, unlike some previous drugs like the one I've got listed there was Zimolti, which actually acted on cannabinoid receptors, but in the end actually created adverse effects with suicidal thoughts. So they actually never got released in the USA. The FDA didn't approve it. The adverse symptoms of these drugs is relatively mild. It's gastrointestinal, so there's a nausea, irritation of the stomach lining, diarrhea, but there's no hypoglycemia, which is often a negative benefit of these drugs. That's when you have not enough glucose in your blood, and you can sort of pass out. There's also been now proven substantial health benefits on cardiovascular, diabetes, and also there are once a week therapies. So it's not like at the moment I'm a type 2 diabetic and I take drugs. I have to take them twice a day. But if I could take something once a week, there's a lot more. It's much easier to have compliance. On the negative side, obviously it's not all fat that you lose. You do lose muscle tone, which is a factor for the elderly. They have to think about. As I mentioned before, the weight's regained if you discontinue, but that's with all therapies. It's relatively expensive at the moment, and it's not universally covered by health insurance. That's a big factor in the US. There's no oral version of it currently. You have to inject, but they've got sort of dispensers. And there are some investigations on associations with cancers, but that's usually if you're already susceptible to those cancers like thyroid cancer and pancreatitis. So overall, though, in the scheme of a lot of these drugs, it's I'd consider this a very good wonder drug almost.
Yeah, and so so just to dig into that a little bit deeper. So how long have we been sort of testing these drugs for? And
It's been around now at least 10 years on some of the basis of the earlier versions of this, and they've shown that there are don't seem to be any long-term effects, so they're relatively safe in the scheme of drugs, I'd say.
Yeah,
So
and the other one is
it needs to do more investigation, obviously, on long-term effects, but
yeah. If you've got, so say 10 years at most, 10 years at the maximum, but realistically probably 2 or 3 years of pretty in-depth data, I'm guessing, and a long history of and I guess the other part is this is we're talking about early days in terms of as you said, it's a whole new class of something they're targeting, and so now they're all trying all the different variations and what else works and additions and subtractions and things like that as well. So there's a sort of a potential. Maybe they struck on the best ones straight away, but it's also potential that there's other versions, as you said, that might be orally. You might be able to take orally, or once a month, or once every 2 weeks, or whatever it is. Whatever the factor is that will help in terms of people wanting to do this.
Yeah, guys,
they all started.
there's just one thing I'm curious about, and if this has been around for 10 years, why is there so much hype about it now? Like, why is it the trials just coming out now with the benefits, or why now?
It's a long lead time with these drugs. You've got to do a lot of testing, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. They've also got to create it so it's longer acting. So there's a long lead time with these drugs. So I think that's essentially it. And now
so we've had the approvals have only been recently though as well, in terms of more widespread use, I guess, Radek.
Yes.
So
Novo's only come out in the last 1 or 2 years. Eli Lilly's virtually in the last year. So they're the leaders in this field.
And 10 years ago as well, it's similar to Viagra, isn't it? In that Viagra was originally, I think, a blood pressure tablet or something. It wasn't until it wasn't until later they worked out what the other health benefits of it is that I think that's this was obviously targeted as a diabetes thing initially, wasn't it? And then part of it was like, yes, hey, people are losing 15% of their weight as well, and so that's then adding to other factors. So it was I guess 10 years ago, it wasn't being sort of pushed as a weight loss drug as much as it was a diabetes. Am I right? Is that right?
Right. Yeah, it's an evolution of drugs. In fact, Eli Lilly about 5 years ago decided to pivot and to concentrate on its metabolic type drugs and walk away from some of the oncology drugs that they were doing before. And it's sort of, I guess, through the research, they've got better and better versions of it. Till now, they've got this one, which, maybe the initial one only gave 5% weight loss, but now, they've now refined that up to virtually almost 20% over the period. So.
Yeah, and then the other part is a lot of this is to sort of a lot of the gains seem as well to be the appetite suppressant stage, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah.
So obviously not feeling the medical issues around. Yeah, I'm no longer eating 3,000 calories a day. I'm only eating whatever 2,000 calories a day, or whatever the right number is. That's obviously a from a danger perspective, that doesn't seem to have that many downsides in terms of that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and also I noticed the cardiovascular benefits, and is that a byproduct, or is how does that work? I mean, that seems unusual.
Well, if you've got less weight, the less your heart has to do less work, so therefore there's less chance of having a stroke, less chance of obviously the plumbing breaking. So there's benefits. Okay. It's just one of the best things you can do for your health is actually to lose weight. So if you can do it via a tablet, or you can do it via exercise, it's universally, I think, acknowledged as one of the best health outcomes you can do, I guess.
Yeah. And I think for the companies involved, that's where part of their upside, isn't it? Is that and why we've seen stocks like CSL and ResMed in particular be hit quite hard on this is because the expectation is looking at these is that okay, of everyone who's got sleep apnea, for example, a certain proportion of them have worse symptoms because they're overweight, and so by having drugs like this where they can lose the weight. That will then lessen the sleep apnea, and then as you go through all the different types of people who struggle from high blood pressure. Okay, if they could lose 15% of their weight, that would help their blood pressure. People who struggle with as I said, anything to do with heart or and issues is like, yes, if you're carrying that much less weight, then your heart doesn't need to pump as much blood around your body, and so there's all those there's sort of and that's basically where these companies are now, is sort of basically just going in the same way that they sort of went, okay, look, this was originally a diabetes drug, we're going to target to target lessening of diabetes is what we're trying to see as our marker of whether this drug is a success or not. Now they're going through a whole bunch of other factors about going, okay, well, let's target all these other things. Let's run tests on all these other things and seeing, well, if you do lose 15% of your weight, that it does help all these other major drug symptoms out there. So, and so that sort of leads to this next thought, wasn't it, Radek, in terms of the average spending by, we've got one here, average spending by age, but there's also just sort of showing that none of this is linear and that actually you spend a lot of money on older people. And it's a similar type of thing in terms of the weight side, is that if you're spending lots of money on the people who are generally overweight end up costing the medical system a lot more. And so if you could take, I guess it's this overall thesis, if you could take the most overweight 15% of the population and shift them down, bring them back to reduce their weight by 10%, that might have a non-linear effect in terms of the amount of money you need to spend, in that all of a sudden there's a bunch of other issues that go away and you need to spend a lot less on those people. So I don't know, your thoughts, Radek, around, I guess, where the money gets spent on the healthcare side?
In terms of, well, obviously prevention's better than a cure, right? So if you can reduce people's
if you're not a drug manufacturer, yes. Yeah, sure. You're talking about human good, yes. If you're a drug manufacturer, cures, but in terms of societal benefits, yes.
Yeah, societal benefits. So, I mean, the other thing I think back in one of those slides, the child obesity rate is also quite large now. It's up at like 20%. So a lot of adults think so. We're seeing this already from an early age, and that's obviously going to blow out this chart in the longer term if that's not addressed, because obesity is like a multiplying factor for all the other diseases that we've talked about: stroke, cardiovascular, even some of the cancers, I think. So I think if this drug can be used early on, there are positive health benefits for all of society and economies as well.
Excellent. Okay, so what we might do, let's go to you, across to you, Sam.
We'll be back with the investment insights very shortly. Nucleus Wealth is an active and passive investment manager. If you like what you're hearing and want some help with your investing, we can do it for you via our active portfolios. Our tactical and core portfolios use the insights shared in this podcast to construct and manage your investment. We blend tactical portfolios to offer our combinations of international shares, Australian shares, government bonds, and cash. We vary the asset allocation with the goal of protecting your capital in times of market uncertainty. We also have active international and Australian share portfolios. These are chosen using our quality and value investment philosophy. You can find out more at nucleuswealth.com. Now back to the show. And you're back on.
Right. So now what I want to do is talk a little bit about the companies themselves and then the broader sort of macro outlook. So I think from a big picture sense, we've got some charts up just sort of showing the share price performance, and it's been pretty spectacular from both of them. I think maybe, Radek, do you want to give us a quick sort of run through about what else they do and what,
Yep. So Novo Nordisk is really the leader here. They were one of the first ones. They're obviously the first ones on the market with this GLP drug. They've always specialized in metabolic disorders. That's their sort of specialty. At the moment, just looking at their last year's revenues, 66% of their revenues came from these sort of obesity drugs, and the other 33% came from similar areas such as insulin and rare diseases. So, and obviously that obesity proportion is growing very strongly. Eli Lilly, as I said, pivoted away and moved into this sort of area about 5 years ago. At the moment, their breakdown is about 50% on these GLP drugs, and 50% is on other drugs such as they've still got some cancer drugs, they've got something on arthritis, and other type 2 diabetic drugs. Also of note is that Eli Lilly's also looking at Alzheimer's drugs, which has been a very problematic area to create drugs for, and they seem to be having some good results there. They've also got a very good candidate for Crohn's disease, which is another potentially strong drug. So Eli Lilly has a very strong, probably a more diverse pipeline than Novo, but Novo is a very specialized player in this field.
Yeah. So you get So you're getting sort of a more pure play with Novo, but Eli Lilly, there's some diversification as well in similar ones. And so, I mean, just in a big picture sense, from the way we look at both these, is that they end up looking really high quality on our metric, but they both look very expensive. And then it all comes back to how much growth they can get out of these drugs, and they're I guess in terms of forecasts, earnings is roughly doubling for both of them from 2022 through to 2025. They're both roughly doubling earnings. And then growth beyond that looks like it might continue to be pretty strong. And so from an earnings perspective, you look at, say, Novo, and they're sort of priced around about, so if you look at the second 12 months of earnings, so after earnings have doubled, it's sort of priced on around about 26 times. So, more expensive than the market, obviously, but it's given its growth profile, it's not an outrageous sort of multiple that you sort of look at from on that perspective. Eli Lilly is a bit more expensive, but not hugely so. So if you look that sort of 2 years out, you're getting a little bit over 30 times earnings. So if that's all you thought you could get from this, in terms of that, you're going to get that doubling of growth, and then that was it. You weren't going to see any more growth after that. Then you'd probably argue, both these are starting to look overpriced. But if we're looking though at a relatively big expansion of these drugs into, or at least a potential for it, into lots of other areas where you can start seeing people turn up to their doctors and as I said, you're in danger of a stroke, and so, well, what do we need? We need whatever it is, blood thinners and other bits and pieces. But actually, why don't we throw you on this anti-obesity one as well, and you lose 15 kilos, and next thing you know, your odds of getting a stroke is down as well. And so that's where we're obviously not there yet, but it's the potential that I guess these ones have in that perspective.
Can I just add that don't forget Novo's already been in this market for at least a year or two, whereas Eli Lilly's just starting, so it's yet to see the big ramp up. So that's perhaps why you're paying a higher multiple.
Yeah.
And the size of the market also is already growing. I've read quotes by 2030 be $70 billion market. Then I've seen 100 billion, and I'm already seeing 150 billion. So per year, this is per year. Yeah. So they're huge numbers, like peak GLP numbers for Eli Lilly I've seen around 70,000 already. So there's huge upside in it. And I'd also like to point out that Pfizer, when it first came out with its Viagra, traded at 90 times multiples of earnings. So there is potential for the market, obviously, to get exuberant on this. So that's why I don't think it's probably too early to sell it at the moment, but it is expensive, and but there is potential.
My guess as well would be that the market for people needing a little blue pill to help them is going to be smaller than the number of people who would like to lose a little bit of weight as well.
Yeah, there's definitely bigger market.
Yeah. Yes. What's the other thing? So, and then there's another couple of companies who sort of got some drugs in progress.
Yeah, there's some, but they're about 2 years out. I think Amgen is one of them, and
Pfizer.
Yeah.
So
there will be people coming into this market, but obviously they've got about 10 years worth of patent protection, so both these companies should have at least 10 years of good sales. And obviously, they will lose some market share at some point, and then generics will play a factor. But it's still a nice annuity.
Yeah, and so I mean, I think we looked at those as well. So we've got a tilt, for example, now. In our, if you want to take a tilt in some of our portfolios to get extra exposure, in our active portfolios we have exposure to these, but people who say have got a passive investing passively and do want to have an extra exposure to these, we've got one for these weight loss drugs, but we actually have only put the two companies in there because we looked at Pfizer's and Amgen's, which do have drugs in the pipeline, but first of all, they haven't been through any approvals, and so that's always an uncertainty. And secondly, both those are very large drug companies, and you just don't even if they did get them up and running, if they're going to get a 2% market share or a 5% market share, yes, it's big in terms of dollars, but it might not actually be that big in terms of the company's overall earnings. So you might look at, say, Pfizer, for example, and go, yeah, great, it's picked up a 5% share. In 5 years' time, it's picked up a 5% share of the weight loss market, but actually that's only a 2% of the overall company. So if you're looking for a reasonable exposure to these themes, there's really only the two stocks. There's a couple of small cap stocks I think you could get exposure, but really there's these are the two main ones you're looking at. And the other thing worth noting is Novo Nordisk. I forgot to look up the number, but it's a Danish company, and it's some massive proportion of the Danish market. And so there's actually been trading issues around that in the Danish fund managers who only invest, that they might have limitations on. They can only own 20% of any one stock, and this stock's, I feel like it's 40%, maybe even 50% of the index got to. And so they've sort of been structurally underweight and haven't. So some of the discount as well you get in Novo might just be some trading issues around that as well. It's not listed in the US, and so often we find anyway that you can pick up some European stocks a little bit cheaper than what you can find the equivalent in the US for. I might go back to you, Sam.
We'll be back again shortly. If you like what you're hearing but want a low-cost passive option, Nucleus Wealth is the first to offer passive direct indexing in Australia. The first generation of passive investing was index funds. The next gen was ETFs. Now direct indexing is here with significantly more customization and control. The benefit of direct indexing is you can add or subtract investment themes, and we have almost 100 different options to choose from. For example, you could buy an international share direct index portfolio that excludes fossil fuels and arms manufacturers and has a tilt towards cybersecurity and cloud computing. Alternatively, you could buy a portfolio with no screens and an extra exposure to nuclear power and defense contractors. You can find out more at nucleuswealth.com. Now back to just one more quick thing. We just want to ask you for a simple favor. We want to spread the message about transparency, innovation, and integrity in investing. At Nucleus Wealth, we live and breathe these values. We would love it if you can help us spread that message, and subscribing to our channel will help us do that. We would be most grateful if you can hit the like and subscribe button now.
Yeah, so now I wanted to go sort of these longer term macroeconomic investment implications. So there's a number of different ones that people have spoken about, but I think I guess the big picture, I guess utopian sort of view of this is that all these things work. It's relatively you can pop a pill once a week or once every 2 weeks, and it effectively suppresses your appetite and maybe helps you burn a little bit more fat. And so all of a sudden, people, we can go back to the obesity rates of the 70s or the 80s in terms of a small proportion of people, and a lot of people can get those benefits. So the question is, though, for that is that what other industries get affected? So one is that yes, there's some drug manufacturers on one side that will benefit, but there's actually a relatively broad range of other companies that could be affected by this. So I guess fast food is probably one of the first places you go to, and the question there is, does this mean that your it's probably a negative for it in terms of the amount of food consumption. But there are other, there's potential other sides to it, where you say, look, somebody who eats McDonald's or fast food 3 times a day might go back to only eating 2 times a day or once per day. And so that's going to be a drain, obviously, on these, and they might be ordering, medium-sized meals rather than large-sized meals or smaller food things. But the flip side is maybe there are people out there as well who don't eat fast food because of the health issues, but then once they can pop a pill and keep their weight down, maybe then they do eat fast food a little bit more. So I guess there's a pluses and minuses on that side. Radek, your thoughts on?
I think the pill changes your metabolism event, but it doesn't change your behavior necessarily. And I guess a lot of these fast food and those sort of trends are due to behavior. So I think there will be a negative effect on them, but it's be very hard to quantify, I guess.
Yeah, well, and look, obviously everyone colours this by their own experience, but I know certainly, I think as most people who get a bit older, sort of will or struggle with weight, will avoid fast food if they can help it. Whereas if you no longer have as much of a cause and effect on the weight, maybe there's positive there. I guess the diet industry is obviously a big place, but I guess you've got some thoughts on Weight Watchers as one of the companies.
Oh yeah, that was an interesting one. So you think they would be a net negative, right? But Weight Watchers apparently have been very clever. They went and bought a company, I think, called Sequence Health, where essentially they'll now be looking at perhaps dispensing these drugs and looking after the use of them. So given that their database is obviously people with weight problems, they're perfectly positioned to actually benefit from their knowledge base.
And the bit we don't the bit we don't know, isn't it, is that, like, we know with existing diet stuff is that you go on a diet for a bit and then you go off the diet and you get most of it back, and then you can go back on the diet again. And so for Weight Watchers, it's like, well, we have a relatively recurring income stream of people, in terms of those ones. But the question, as you said, is with these new ones is, you get some of it back. Is that going to be the same type of thing where people will go, I'm 80 kilos and then I go to 95 and then I take my drugs again and I go back to 80 and then I'm, you go into that cycle, in which case Weight Watchers are probably doing all right. Whereas if it's if it's more of a permanent, well,
Weight Watchers can become like the trainer, like in exercise, where they'll tell you, okay, if you go off the drugs, and tell you when to go back on, and so they could morph themselves into that sort of role.
Well, hook it up to your Apple Watch or your Fitbit, and just to send you a message saying it looks like you stuck a bit of weight on. It's time to pop back in for a prescription. Yeah,
exactly. So it's an interesting play on the sector, that one, I think.
Now we've already seen some quite negative effects on ResMed, and there's some other companies as well around, which are, I guess, these. Let's use ResMed, but as an example. But I guess I am talking about a whole range of other companies in the same part, where effectively, I think ResMed initially came out basically saying, no, these drugs are quite expensive, and we don't think it'll make much difference at all. And by the way, it's only a small proportion of people who have sleep apnea because they're overweight. There's actually a whole bunch of other factors that give sleep apnea. To which I think the market basically went, just a minute, you're telling me that people would prefer to sleep with a vacuum cleaner on their face rather than take these weight loss drugs and be skinny. And potentially the market's actually pushed too hard on some of those ones. But and that's sort of one thing, I guess, we're sort of cognizant of as we're looking through these ones. But I guess there is that overall sort of overarching thing, as we said, Radek, that if these weight loss drugs are successful in knocking off a couple of $1 trillion of cost, out of all these other hospitals and doctors and things like that, then that has a genuine impact on the rest of the health. So,
I mean, the growth in obesity, I guess, was a positive growth profile for ResMed, right? So if that decreases, obviously ResMed will be hit. Now, the extent of that, they argue, is that you will spend $15,000 on ResMed over your lifetime, but these drugs will cost you $150,000. So, in the scheme of things, they're arguing that their market is still large, and that's probably true. But
I did want to talk about the costs though as well, because I think, and to use Viagra as an example, I think the costs of Viagra have fallen by, I don't know, 90% or something like that from when they first introduced it to now. The way these drugs are produced in terms of the production line, is there anything that sort of suggests that actually, the initial problems they're having in terms of setting up and getting scale, that there's something endemic in the way that these drugs are produced, that they'll always be expensive, or does this look like, I guess, what most other drugs look like in terms of being, when you've got to produce 1,000 pills a week, your cost is X, and then if you're producing 1 million, 10,000, then you get to bring that down to half of X, and then when you get to 1 million, then you get.
I'm sure they're making huge margins on this, and with scale, it'll definitely get cheaper if they so wish. But obviously, while they've got their patents, they will try and squeeze as much money as possible out of it.
And while you've got a production issue in terms of you can't produce as much drugs as to satisfy demand, then you probably do want to leave the prices high, don't you? It's saying, if I can only produce whatever it is enough for 100,000 people a week, then I'll keep the price high. And when I can produce enough for 1 million a week, I can cut the prices, and 10 million a week, I can.
I mean, what will be a game changer for them is if the insurance companies in the US start subsidizing these drugs. So then the price will go down, obviously, because they'll negotiate down, but the volumes will increase incredibly.
Yeah. And so that's the part where I'm looking at it saying, okay, yes, it might be in the US, for example, it might be $800 or $1,000 a month at the moment. So you might be looking at, say, 10 grand a year in costs. But if you see a significant fall in that, and I would think that sort of a 75% fall is certainly what we've seen elsewhere in these types of drugs. So it wouldn't be unreasonable, especially if it goes goes viral, so to speak. It turns into a blockbuster. And so that means, $2,500 a year, so you're $200 a month. Now for the healthcare companies, as you said, the insurers were actually pretty heavily incentivized to do this, because, let's say it costs them $100 a month, but they actually end up saving, a couple of $1,000 in avoided medical costs for people. Then, they might be fully on board with sort of trying to. Yeah.
That's why these studies, which show a 20% improvement cardiovascular care results, is really important for the future benefit of these drugs.
Yeah, so. and that's obviously another area where we are heavily invested as well, is the medical insurers, because if you do get that benefit coming through, they're probably one of the big ones who will benefit from that. So if you look at the healthcare sector and this does turn into something bigger, then there's a number of certainly doctors and hospitals and other other sort of areas of health that will lose out in terms of less money spent on it. But the medical insurance area is quite possibly one of the areas that would be one of the bigger beneficiaries of it. So there's those. So social stuff. So So I'm assuming you've grabbed this from somewhere else. Is it? Dating apps.
Dating apps. Obviously, as people lose weight, they get more confident. They're basically back on the market, so they're expected to see a boost. Gyms might be maybe perhaps negative, because people think, I can take a pill, I don't have to do the exercise. But then
or
there's positive, bit where they want to buff up again. So it's possible those ones.
That's an interesting one, because I've seen a couple of takes on that of a similar thing, and I honestly don't know which way. I'd be interested, but probably one for people to comment in the add something in the comments. But the idea is that I can certainly see people who would go, oh, I don't have to go to the gym anymore. I'll just convert my gym membership into a, rather than spending $100 a month on a gym membership, I'll spend $100 a month on taking drugs that net, I'm the same weight. But there are also, I think there's stuff, I've certainly seen stuff where people, and it might be women in particular, I think, in the ones I've seen, were less likely to go to the gym if they thought they're overweight. It's almost like they needed to get fit enough to go to the gym so that then they could, sort of like and so maybe there's an element to that. And I mean, I guess the other thing from a big picture sense, before we look at those other ones, is that if you look at people's spending habits and you said, okay, you're going to have on average, you're going to eat 20% less, and so you're going to spend 20% less on food potentially. Maybe that just does that end up in just better quality food, or does that mean you just take that as a cost saving? Don't know. If there's lower health costs and other factors, there is a reasonable amount of money that might be in terms of extra disposable income that people could have if this does come through in the more ideal situations. They continue to get breakthroughs and avoid negative outlays. So there's that side. So you've picked your other ones there, luxury goods.
Luxury goods, I guess, with people feel better about themselves, they spend more money on new things.
Or if you feel depressed about how heavy you are, do you go out and buy a Louis Vuitton bag? I don't know.
I'll put those in because we're long these luxury goods. So I'm trying to think that they're.
And then the wellness industry.
Is their industry? Well, these are the ones who have sort of like you take this Chinese drug and you will lose weight, and they've never been shown to really work. When people can say, well, here's something that my chemist I know that works and has got results, but science behind it, proper science behind it, that so they're going to, I guess, perhaps suffer.
Yeah.
So none of these are major influences. I would have thought they're at the margin, I guess. So.
And as I said, it feels unknown as to whether, do people take that extra money that they don't have to spend on health and food and just buy better quality stuff, or do they or does it end up being more spent on travel, like more travel and luxury goods? You've got more disposable income. Is that where the money ends up, or is there other factors at play? And so certainly some larger themes that can come out of this, and I don't think we're sort of, well, for us there's parts where the stocks we're looking at where we're like, yes, we actually like this theme already. This is one more reason to buy the stock, then that certainly fits. I'm not quite sure where or sell the stock. I'm not quite sure we're yet at the stage where you'd say we know enough to sort of say, for example, to go short all the fast food players because structurally they're going to underperform for the next 20 years. I don't think we're at that point, but I think there's certainly enough room to be thinking about some of these themes within your portfolios. Okay, the question of the week, Sam.
Yeah, so just before the question of the week, there's just one thing I want to add. Damo, you obviously mentioned we now do have a tilt towards weight loss drug producers. And you can add that in to any of our portfolios, or you can actually have that as a standalone portfolio. This is just a smaller tilt with just two stocks, Eli Lilly and Novo, but we do have around 100 screens in tilt. So some clients do use these tilts as a standalone portfolio. Some examples: the cloud computing or cybersecurity, if you just want that. So there's that option there. And just want to let the listeners know as well, we do have two new other tilts. So we've got a gold ETF, a hedged and an unhedged version there. So if you want to have, a Nucleus Wealth.
That's for physical gold as opposed to gold stocks. We had the gold stocks one in there, which we've got for people who've already used, and these is now physical gold as well for more physical gold exposure.
Yep. Yeah, so I mean, clients have been asking for this, so yeah, we wanted to give them that option, so that's there as well. And now we'll go to the question of the week. So this is for viewers to have some discussion in the comment section over the coming days. So the question for this week is, will weight loss drugs become a major investment theme? So feel free to post your thoughts and engage with us and some of the other viewers over the coming days. We do have a question from Richard. It's a little bit unrelated, but I'll ask it anyway because it has been a common theme that we've talked about over the weeks and months. So Richard's asking, there are numerous commentators having stated that interest rates are going to be higher for longer. If so, what are the downside ramifications if it takes 3 or 4 years to get to the RBA target numbers?
Yeah, I guess the question for me within a lot of this is saying, are we in the stage where we're going to have to do more damage to the economy in order to get to the end result of lower inflation? And I guess the big issue is we're looking at is most of the drivers of inflation in Australia aren't really things that can be fixed by interest rates. So high oil prices. Oil prices are a globally traded commodity. It doesn't, what Australian interest rates are really doesn't affect the oil price. High energy prices in terms of electricity and gas prices within Australia. Again, this is probably more comes back to the government in the government has actually, it's got in its power the ability to put in policies and procedures to try and bring prices down, but they've actually chosen not to. They've chosen to basically effectively side with the producers and not pick any fights with any of the sort of global gas companies. And so by doing so, we've ended up with higher energy prices. And so that's, again, raising interest rates really doesn't make that much of a difference to that. I think you would need the interest rates to raise pretty bloody high to get people to start using less heating or less cooling. And then the other major one is housing, and basically we've got and there are a number of sort of assorted ones as well, but we've basically got we're running record levels of immigration, sort of roughly double what with the highest we'd ever done before, and that was sort of double again. So you against our sort of what rate we were running say 4 or 5 years ago, we're running at least triple and getting close to 4 times as many. And so, and Australia was already doing some of the most building of houses in the world. So it's actually just really struggling to get enough houses up to house all the people that are coming in. And higher interest rates aren't actually helping on that. They're actually hindering it because it makes it harder for builders to build because they need to spend the money up front and take the risks. And we've had a lot of builders go broke in recent times. So all of the factors that are well, not all the factors, but most of the factors that are driving Australian inflation aren't affected by interest rates. And so what that means is if they do keep on having to jack interest rates and hold them up higher for longer, that means you got to do more damage to the rest of the economy because we're not going to do we're not going to sort of have sort of fiscal or immigration policies that would help ease the inflation in other areas. And so, that higher for longer sort of implies more damage at some point to the Australian economy is going to be needed in order to get inflation down.
Excellent. Thanks, Damo. Richard, I hope that gives you a good answer there. And yeah, that pretty much wraps us up for today. So, Damo, thanks for sharing your views. Radek, it's been awesome to have you back on. And I'm sure it's a topic that we're going to comment on over the years. I don't think this one's going away. So looking forward to our next installment when things develop. So thanks, guys. Excellent. So we do welcome your feedback on this podcast, especially in regards to suggestions for future topics. If you do have any ideas, drop it in the comment section below, or you can send us an email to contact@nucleuswealth.com. Also, if you know of anyone that might get some value out of today's episode, we'd really appreciate it if you do share it with them. So from myself, Damien, Radek, and the rest of the team at Nucleus Wealth, thanks for watching, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Radek. Got to run.